He held the cap upside down like a collection plate, and the $20 bills were already crowding the bottom of it. Sergeant Ray Maddox walked the line of bunks the night before selection started, shaking the cap so the bills whispered against each other, and every man who dropped one and grinned like he was getting away with something. 20 says the girl quits by Friday, he said, loud enough to carry, loud enough to reach 4 bunks down where a compact woman in a faded gray PT shirt sat lacing her boots and saying absolutely nothing. Smart money's on Tuesday. But I'm a generous man. I'll give her till Friday. He counted it out by the door, $800 of 40 men's certainty, and as he counted she stood and walked past him to fill her canteen at the spigot, and she heard every word of it, and she did not slow down, and she did not speed up. Now hold on. Hold on right there. I want you to look at the man with the cap. I want you to look at him good, because he matters more to this story than you think. 27 years I wore the uniform of the United States Marine Corps, and in 27 years I have watched 100 men do exactly what that man is doing, with the cap and the easy money and the loud mouth. And I'm going to tell you something now that's not easy for me to say, friend, because I want you to trust me by the time we get to the end of this thing. If I'd been a young man in that barracks that night, I think I'd have put a 20 in that cap too. That's the truth of it. That's the ugly little truth lying at the bottom of this whole story, and I'd rather hand it to you straight up front than have you find it on your own later. This is not a story about a bad man and a good woman. I've told those, and they're easy, and the world's already full of them. This is a story about 40 Marines who were every one of them dead certain they knew something, and the one of them who lived long enough and got honest enough to stand up and say out loud that they were wrong. His name is Ray Maddox, Sergeant, United States Marine Corps. He started that pool. He put in the very first 20. And by Friday morning of that week, Ray Maddox was the one being carried off that course on a litter with a broken leg and a packed bag waiting by the door. And she was still out there in the heat, still moving, still in it. I came to know him 20 years after all this, an old gray-haired man with a county job and a bad leg and a folded-up $20 bill in his wallet that he could not bring himself to spend. We'll get to how that bill ended up in his wallet. We'll get to all of it. The woman lacing her boots is Corporal Sydney Vaughn, Force Reconnaissance Selection, out in the Western Desert, the summer of 2009. 41 candidates reported to that course. 40 of them were men. And then there was her. My name is Gunny Hargrove. 27 years in the Corps. 14 of those years I spent running the Scout Sniper School at Quantico, Virginia, and if I learned one thing in 14 years of watching human beings break and not break, it's that a man's first guess about a person is almost always wrong. Almost always. Ray Maddox learned that lesson in 5 days out in the desert, and it cost him the thing he wanted most in the world. He told me once, sitting on my porch, that it was the best money he ever lost. Sit down, friend. Pour yourself something. Let me tell you who she was, and let me tell you who he was, and let me tell you how a $20 bet turned into the longest education of one man's life. The selection corps sat on a piece of high desert the Corps owned, and the rest of the country had the good sense to forget about. Flat hardpan that cracked like old paint under a boot. Long berms of loose sand that gave way under you when you needed them most. Scrub that grabbed at your trousers, and a sun that came up over the eastern ridgeline mean, and stayed mean clear through to dark. There was no shade out there you didn't carry with you, and you couldn't carry much, because everything you carried up a hill. Sydney Vaughn drove it alone on a Sunday afternoon in a sand-colored Tacoma with 180,000 miles on the odometer and a crack running across the bottom of the windshield. She parked where the sign told her to park. She carried her own gear to the bay in 2 trips, no help offered to her and none requested by her, and she stacked it on her rack in the exact order the packing list said to stack it, in the order they'd inspect it, because she had read that packing list 4 separate times on the drive out from where she'd come from, and she did not intend to surrender a single point to paperwork. Not one. Some men lose before the first march even starts, just on the gear layout, and she decided a long time before she ever turned onto that desert road that she was not going to be one of them. She was 24 years old. She stood about 5'6" in her boots, and she went maybe 140 pounds with a full canteen on her belt. The men sizing her up from across the bay added all of that together, the inches and the pounds, and they came to the conclusion that men like that always come to. They looked at the size of her, and they thought they were looking at the whole of her. They thought the body was the equation. They were not running the math she was running. That was their first mistake, and most of them never figured out it was a mistake at all. The rest of the candidates were a hard-looking crowd, the way they always are. Infantry, mostly. A few off ships. A couple from reconnaissance battalions already, trying to make the jump up to the next thing. All of them young, all of them fit, all of them carrying that loose, easy, untested confidence that young fit men carry into a room before the room has gotten the chance to teach them anything real about themselves. They moved like men who had never yet met the limit of their own bodies, because most of them hadn't. Ray Maddox was the loudest of them, and he was the loudest by a good margin. 26 years old, built like a doorframe, sergeant's chevrons on his uniform, and a sergeant's certainty in everything he said. He had presence, the kind that fills up a space whether you invite it to or not, and he filled the bay up the moment he walked into it. Within an hour of his arrival, he knew every man's name, and he had a confident opinion about every man's chances, and he had appointed himself, the way certain men always do, the unofficial mayor of the misery they were all about to share. Some men get smaller when they're nervous. Maddox got bigger, louder. It was his way of holding the fear off, and I've known 1,000 of him, and I want to be fair to the man, because he didn't know yet what he didn't know. He noticed Vaughn the way a man notices weather. Something to remark on. Something that didn't change his plans for the day. "You sure you're in the right building, Corporal?" he said, when she walked past the foot of his bunk. A couple of the men around him laughed the easy laugh that follows a sergeant's joke. She stopped. She looked at him. Not long. About a second, maybe a second and a half. And there was no heat in it, no flush, no offense, nothing he could grab onto and play with. She looked at him the way you'd look at a slope you were about to climb. Just measuring it. Just figuring the grade. "Bay 4, she said. "Same as you." And she went on to her rack. That was the whole conversation. The entire thing. Maddox told me, sitting on my porch 30 years down the road with my old dog Bishop's head resting on his boot, that he should have heard something in it that night, in that flat, even, nothing in it voice of hers. He said most people, when you needle them, they hand you something back. A little flash of temper, a tightening around the eyes, something. It tells you you've reached them. She handed him nothing. He said it was like throwing a hard right hand at a bank of fog and feeling your fist just keep going. But he didn't hear it that night. That night, all he heard was a setup for a joke, and the cap came out after the lights were supposed to be down, and the 20s went into the bottom of it one after another, soft as falling leaves. The first morning of selection began at 0400 with a ruck march, and the cadre did not tell them how far it would be. That was deliberate. You were never told how far. You marched until the men with the clipboard said stop, and the not knowing was its own kind of weight, heavier sometimes than the load on your back, because the mind goes to dark places when it can't see the end of a thing. 60 pounds of gear, give or take. Hard pen first, then a long stretch of that grabbing sand, then a road that ran up a grade that did not seem to want to end. The instructors walked the column with clipboards and said almost nothing at all, which was a menace all its own, because every single word they wrote down on those clipboards was a word about you, and you never got to read it. Maddox went out fast. That was always his way. Big strong man, big strong pace, right up near the front of the column, where the strong men naturally cluster in the early miles. And he was talking, even then, conserving nothing at all, narrating the march under his breath and over it for anyone close enough to hear him, calling the grade, calling the pace, calling himself a tough old bird. And 2 or 3 times across those early miles he twisted around at the waist to look back down the long line of laboring men, to see where the woman had ended up. She was in the middle of the pack, not up front, not falling off the back either, right in the dead heart of the column, moving at a pace that did not change. Not at mile 1 and not at mile 6, the same length of stride the whole way, the same rhythm of breathing. And while the strong young men around her surged ahead, and then faded, and then surged again and faded again, burning matches they were going to want back later in the week, Sydney Vaughn went up that endless grade like she was being measured out of a machine, one identical step at a time. Maddox looked back at her, and he did not understand a single thing he was seeing. He saw a woman in the middle of the pack, and he thought middle meant weak. He thought slow meant struggling. He thought she was already starting to come apart and just hadn't admitted it to herself yet. She wasn't coming apart. She was doing arithmetic. But that's the next thing, and I'm going to get to it. Now here is what most folks miss. And I missed it myself for years, friend, so I'm not standing up here pretending I was born knowing it. When Maddox needled her in that barracks, and she handed him nothing back, every man in that bay read it as toughness. Pride. A woman too stubborn and too proud to take the bait a sergeant dangled in front of her. They told themselves a little story about her, the way men do, and the story was she's got something to prove, and she's too proud to show it, and that pride'll burn her up by Wednesday. It wasn't pride. It was arithmetic. Plain cold arithmetic run behind a still face. I'll tell you what I told my students for 14 years, every class, the first week. Everything is a budget. Everything. Your water is a budget, and when it's gone, it's gone. Your sleep is a budget, and you can't borrow against it without paying it back double. Your body heat is a budget out in the cold, and your body water is a budget out in the heat. And out on a selection course, friend, your words are a budget too. Your breath is a budget. Because every single sentence you spend arguing with a fool is breath out of your lungs and blood to your face, and a little flick of heat off the surface of your skin, and every bit of that is something you are going to want back at mile 10, when the sun has cleared the ridge and the sand is pulling at your boots like it's got hands. Maddox spent freely. He spent his pace out near the front. He spent his breath narrating. He spent his words on every man within earshot, building himself up, holding his own fear at bay with noise. On day 1, he was a rich man throwing money off a balcony, and it felt wonderful, the way it always feels wonderful right up until the bill comes due. Sydney Vaughn was counting every coin. Every one. She wasn't ignoring Maddox because she felt herself above him. There wasn't any contempt in it, no matter how much it might have looked like contempt from the outside. She was ignoring him because answering him cost more than the answer was worth, and she had already run the calculation, fast and clean, the way she ran every calculation, and the numbers came back the same way they always came back for her. Keep your mouth shut. Keep your stride even. Keep your heat in your body where it belongs, and let the desert do your arguing for you, because the desert is a far better arguer than you'll ever be, and it never gets tired, and it never gets emotional, and by Wednesday it will have settled every account on that course down to the penny. That's the whole difference between those two people, friend. That's it. That's the entire thing, and the wild part, the part that still gets me, is that it was visible on the very first morning if you only knew how to look. One of them was spending. One of them was saving. One of them was loud because he was scared, and one of them was quiet because she'd already made peace with the fear a long time ago, in some other desert, in some other year, and didn't have anything left to prove to a man holding a cap full of 20s. The desert always settles that account. Always. It just takes till about Wednesday to do it. Now, back to the course. By Monday night, they were down to 36. The first man to quit didn't even make a production out of it, and that surprised some of them, because they'd all imagined quitting would be a big dramatic thing. It wasn't. He just sat down on the edge of the pool deck after water confidence and didn't get back up, and after a minute a cadre walked over and crouched down beside him, and said something low and quiet that nobody else could hear, and the man nodded, and that was the end of it. Drop on request. They call it DR. 3 letters and you're gone. They walked him off, and you never laid eyes on him again, and by the next morning his rack was stripped down to the bare mattress like he had never been there at all, like the course had simply absorbed him and moved on. That was the thing that got into men's heads, more than the marching, more than the cold water. How fast and how completely a man could just vanish. Water confidence is where the desert stops being your enemy for a while, and the swimming pool becomes it instead. They put you in the water in your camouflage utilities and your boots, full uniform, and they bind your hands, and they bind your feet, and then they ask you to do things in the deep end of that pool that every single animal instinct buried in your body stands up and screams against. The whole evolution is built on one question, and only one. Can you stay calm when your body has become absolutely certain that it is dying? That's it. That's the only thing they're measuring. Everything else is just the shape they pour the question into. And here's the secret of it, the thing the strong ones can't believe when you tell them. Most of being good at water confidence is not fighting. The men who fought the water lost to the water every time, without exception. And it was the big strong ones who fought it hardest, because their whole lives their strength had been the answer to every problem, and now here was a problem where strength was the trap. The more muscle you got, the more oxygen that muscle eats, and the harder you thrash, the faster you burn through the little air you've got, and the water just waits you out. Water's got nothing but time. Maddox thrashed. I'll give the man this much, and I'll give it to him gladly. He passed the evolution. He was too strong and too stubborn to fail it outright. But he came up off the bottom of that pool every single time clawing and gasping and wild-eyed, having spent 2 and 3 times the energy he actually needed to spend, because his body did not know any other way to meet a threat than to attack it. Vaughn sank slow and easy. The cadre who ran the pool deck that day told Maddox about it years and years later, and Maddox carried it to me. So understand what you're hearing is 2 men, both of them haunted in their own way, remembering a woman at the bottom of a swimming pool. She went under with her hands tied and her boots laced, and instead of fighting up toward the light, she let herself settle, all the way down, calm as anything, and she found the bottom of that pool with the soles of her boots, and she pushed off it gentle, just exactly enough to break the surface and steal one clean breath, and then she let herself sink again. And again. And again. Calm as a flat stone skipping across a pond. They had to call the evolution and tell her it was over. The instructor told Maddox she'd have stayed down there all day if they'd let her, just breathing off the bottom, sipping air, patient as a stone. A still hunter. That's the phrase that surfaced in my own mind the first time Maddox described it to me on my porch. Some animals run their prey down across the open ground, all speed and fury, and those are the ones in the nature shows. But some animals don't run anything down at all. Some animals wait. They go still, so still they disappear, and they let the world come to them, and when it comes they take it without ever having broken a sweat. I trained 27 years worth of shooters, friend, and I will tell you the still ones scared me more than the fast ones every single time. The fast ones, you can see them coming. The still ones, you never do. Tuesday was land navigation, and Tuesday night was land navigation again, only now it was in the full dark, alone, every man for himself with a compass and a laminated map and a string of points scattered out across miles of bad broken country, and a clock running the whole time that you couldn't see and couldn't argue with. This is where a selection course thins you out hard and fast, because a man can hide inside a crowd on a ruck march. He can let the energy of the group carry him along, match his footfalls to the man ahead, lose himself in the herd. But you put that same man out alone in the dark with nothing but a compass and his own mind for company, and he cannot fake one single thing. The dark strips the act right off of him. There's no audience out there. There's just the country and the points and whatever he actually is underneath the noise. 3 more men quit on Tuesday. The pool of candidates was thinning steadily now, and here's a thing that Maddox did not notice at the time, because he wasn't keeping track of the right column of numbers. Of the men who had dropped a 20 into that cap on Sunday night, 2 were already gone off the course by Tuesday evening. Walked off. Stripped racks. Vanished. The smart money was leaving. The smart money was washing right out into the desert, $20 at a time. Vaughn came in off her night navigation second of everyone. Second, behind one wiry kid from a reconnaissance battalion who'd grown up running around the woods of some northern state with a compass in his hand since before he could drive, and who would go on to do just fine. She came in quiet, the way she did everything quiet, and she plotted her final point on the master map for the cadre, and then she walked over to the wheel of a parked truck, and she sat down in the dirt with her back against the big tire, and she closed her eyes, and she slept, sitting straight up in the cold desert dark. For the 19 minutes they gave the candidates before the next evolution kicked off, Sydney Vaughn slept like the dead, because sleep was in the budget too, and there were 19 minutes of it sitting right there on the table free for the taking, and so she took every one of them. She didn't talk. She didn't pace off her nerves. She didn't relive her route or worry over the next event. She banked the sleep, because the numbers said bank it, and the numbers were the only voice she'd ever fully trusted. Maddox came in 11th that night. Still in it. Still standing. But the volume coming off the man had a different quality to it now. A different grain. And if you'd known what you were listening for, you'd have caught it. Because here's the thing about men, friend. A thing it took me half my career to learn. The very first crack in a man's certainty does not show up as doubt. It never does. It shows up as more noise. Louder. Bigger. More jokes, more opinions, more narration. A man who has started, somewhere down deep where he won't look at it, to suspect that he might fail, will get louder about how he's going to succeed. The noise is the bandage he wraps around the wound he won't admit he's got. Maddox got louder Tuesday night. And that was the first sign, to anyone watching close, that Maddox had started to bleed. Now before we go any further, friend, if you're still with me, I want you to do an old jarhead a favor. Hit that subscribe button. That's all. I tell one of these stories every Sunday night, and some of them I've been carrying around in my head for 20, 30 years, the way Ray Maddox carried that folded 20 in his wallet. Some of them I'm telling out loud for the very first time. If you want to be here for the next one, you know what to do. I'm not going to ask you twice. I never do. Maggie says that's my whole problem as a salesman, and she's probably right. Now pour yourself a little more of whatever you've got, and let's get back out to the desert, because Wednesday is where this thing really begins. Wednesday is when they took the sleep away. People who've never done it don't understand what real sleep deprivation actually is. They think it's just being tired. It isn't. Tiredness is a Tuesday feeling. Tiredness is something coffee fixes. What the cadre do to a man Wednesday into Thursday into Friday is something else entirely. Something there isn't a good clean word for in the regular language. They keep you moving for 70, 80 hours, evolution stacked on evolution, with no real rest in any of it, and somewhere down in there your own mind quietly stops being your friend. It turns on you. You start seeing things out at the edge of the tree line that are not there. You forget the order that words are supposed to go in. You'll be carrying a telephone pole on your shoulder at 3 in the morning with 5 other half-dead men, and out of nowhere you'll start crying, with no thought behind it, and no feeling you can name, and then 10 minutes later you'll be laughing at nothing at all, and none of it is really you. It's just your brain misfiring as it runs the tank down toward empty. This is the part of selection that has almost nothing left to do with the body. The body gave out days ago, for most of them. The body's just me being dragged along by now. This part is about what's underneath the body. This is the part where they finally get to see who you actually are when there is nothing left in the tank to hold the performance together. Because every man walks onto that course with a performance running. Every single one. A version of himself he's showing the world. And the act is always the first thing to burn off when the sleep goes. Maddox's act went Wednesday night. Not all at once. But the narration stopped. The man who had known every name in the bay and had a confident opinion about every man's odds went quiet, finally, somewhere in the small black hours of a log carry, and the quiet was worse on him than all the noise had ever been. Because in the quiet, with nothing left to say, and no one listening anyway, Ray Maddox started to feel the thing down in his leg. He'd first felt it Tuesday. A deep, dull ache low in the right shin, on the inside of the bone, down where the muscle can't reach to protect anything. He'd told himself it was a bruise. Strong men are forever telling themselves things. He'd been driving that leg into hardpan in those big oversized confident strides of his for 3 days straight, leading with strength the way he'd always led with strength, spending instead of saving, and somewhere in the middle of his right tibia a hairline crack had quietly opened up. And now, every time the boot came down, he was driving a wedge a little deeper into that crack, and his body was screaming a warning up a channel his pride had stopped listening to years ago. He did not stop. I want to be fair to the man, because he's earned fair from me. Ray Maddox did not quit. Whatever else you want to say about him, and there's plenty you could say about the version of him that held a cap on Sunday night. When his own body started to fail him out there in the dark, he gritted his teeth down to the roots, and he kept driving forward. And that's the cruel joke sitting at the center of this whole thing, friend, the part that I've turned over in my own head 100 times on my porch. The quitting would have cost him so much less than the driving did. If he dropped on request Tuesday night with a sore leg, he'd have walked off that course on 2 good legs and come back another year. But that wasn't in him. So instead he stayed, and he drove, and the desert kept the change. Sometime Thursday morning, before first light, the column was crossing a wash. Slick rock and loose round stones in the dark, ankle-breaking country, the kind of ground you have to read with your feet because your eyes are no good to you. And a candidate 2 men ahead of Maddox went down hard. Young kid named Pruitt. Caught the toe of his boot in a gap between 2 rocks and went straight down, and you could hear the wind punch right out of him when he hit, that flat ugly sound. And a couple of the men in front of Maddox just stepped over him and kept going. Because that's what 70 hours with no sleep does to a man. It doesn't make him cruel, exactly. It makes stepping over a fallen man the path of least resistance, and at hour 70 the path of least resistance is the only path a starving brain can still see. Vaughn stopped. She was 4 or 5 men back in the column, behind Maddox, and she came up on Pruitt down in the rocks, and she stopped. She didn't say anything soft. She didn't ask him if he was all right. She got a hand up under his arm, and she said, "Up. Now. On me. Flat. Even." The exact same voice she'd used on Maddox at the foot of his bunk on Sunday night. The voice with nothing in it you could grab. And she hauled him up out of those rocks, and she pulled his arm across her shoulders. This 140-pound woman 70-plus hours into the worst thing the Marine Corps had to offer, and she walked him forward. Carried half his weight across that wash until his own legs remembered how to hold him up. And then she let him go, and she dropped back into her own place in the line, and she never said one more word about it. Maddox saw the whole thing. He told me, on my porch, 30 years gone and his voice still catching on it, that he watched it from 10 feet away in the gray dark, and something turned over in his chest that he did not have a word for at the time. He had a word for it later. He'd had years to find the word. The word was shame. Because here's what he understood. Standing there watching her carry a man she had every earthly reason to let lie. He'd spent 3 days probing how strong he was. 3 days of loud, expensive, look-at-me strength. And she had spent those same 3 days quietly building a different kind of strong altogether. The kind that has something left over at hour 70. The kind with enough slack in it to pick up a stranger and carry him. His strength was the kind that runs a man dry and then abandons him in a ditch. Hers was the kind that doesn't run out, because she'd never spent a nickel of it on show. He limped on into the dark, and the wedge in his shin went a little deeper with every step. He made it to Friday morning. I will give the man that for as long as I draw breath. Ray Maddox made it to the morning of the 5th day, and that is more than 30 of those 40 men managed to do. Most of that cap full of 20s was long gone by Friday, washed out into the desert, rack stripped bare. But on the morning of the 5th day, on a casualty evacuation evolution, with a litter and a load of sandbags up on his shoulders, Ray Maddox's right leg simply quit holding the weight. The hairline finished what the hardpan had started days before. Stress fracture, clean through the bone. He went down in the sand, and he could not get back up, and this time there was no faking it, and no gritting through it, and no driving forward on willpower, because a bone that's broken in two does not care how badly a man wants to keep going. The body had finally cashed a check the will couldn't cover. A cadre crouched down over him in the sand. Same low, quiet voice they'd used on the man at the edge of the pool on Monday night, the same 3 soft words for all of them in the end. And Ray Maddox, 26 years old, Sergeant of Marines, the man who'd shaken that cap full of money up and down the line of bunks 5 nights before, lay there in the hardpan with a broken leg while the whole brutal machine of selection ground on around him, men still moving, still suffering, still in it, and he was done. He was out. They carried him to the aid station on the same kind of litter he'd been carrying when the bone let go. Sit with that a second, friend. Just sit with it. He held the cap on Sunday night. $800 riding on the woman quitting by Friday. He'd put in the first 20 himself with his own hand to get it started. And on Friday morning, he was the one carried off that course on a litter. And she was still out there in the rising heat. Still moving. Still in it. Now I'll tell you the part that Maddox could barely get out. 30 years a free man, and it still snagged in his throat like a fishhook every time he came to it. While he was lying in that aid station Friday, his leg splinted up, washed out, his packed bag already waiting for him by the door opened, and a knot of the surviving candidates came filing through on a turnover between evolutions, grabbing water, refilling canteens, and she came through with them. Sydney Vaughn, filthy from boots to scalp, hollowed out, eyes sunk back in her head, swaying a little on her feet the way every one of them was swaying by then, 80-some hours into it. She came through the aid station, and she walked right past his rack on her way to the water point. And Maddox told me he did not know, lying there, what it was he wanted from her. Part of him wanted her to gloat. He said it plain, on my porch, no shame left in him by then about admitting it. He said it would have been easier on him if she gloated, if she'd stopped and looked down at him in that splint and collected on the bed with her eyes, because then he could have gone right on hating her, and hating her was simple and clean, and it would have let him off the hook. She did not gloat. She filled her canteen at the point, and on her way back past his rack she stopped, just for a second, and she looked down at him, at the splendid leg, at the packed bag by the door that told the whole story without a word. And she did not say, "I told you so," because she had never told him anything, not once, the entire week. She just gave him one short nod. The kind of nod one Marine gives another across a bad morning. The kind that doesn't mean you won and you lost. The kind that means I see you. You came as far as your body would carry you. There's no shame in a bone. And then she was gone, back out the door into the heat and the light, back out to finish the thing, and Ray Maddox never spoke a single word to her on that course. Not one, the entire week. And the only thing that ever passed between the two of them was a nod he was dead certain he had not earned. Hell of a thing to carry, friend. He carried it the rest of his life. Sydney Vaughn finished selection on a Sunday, 8 days after she'd driven in alone in that beat-up Tacoma. Of the 41 souls who'd reported to that course, fewer than a dozen were standing at the end of it. And every single man who had put a 20 into the cap on the first night was gone. Every one. The smart money had washed out to the last bill, and the long shot was still on her feet. She didn't celebrate. Maddox heard about this part the way he heard about all of it, later, secondhand, piecing her together for the rest of his life out of other men's accounts, like a man assembling a photograph of someone he'd met once, briefly, in the dark. When they told her she'd made it, she nodded, asked them where to stack her gear, and then she went and slept for 14 hours straight. That was the celebration. That was the whole party. And then she got up and went and did the work, which was every last thing she had ever wanted out of any of it. I'm going to hand you 20 years now in just a couple of breaths, because her career has earned its own Sunday night, and I mean to give it one down the road. She went where the community goes, which is to say, she went to the places that never make the news and aren't supposed to. And she did the job at a level that turned all those men who'd once doubted her into a kind of background hum she'd stopped being able to hear years before. She made sergeant, then staff sergeant, then gunnery sergeant. The rank Maddox himself had been wearing the night he shook the cap, and she kept right on climbing past it. She got hurt, and she healed up, and she went back. She buried friends, more than her share. She got good, and then she got better than good, and somewhere along the line she crossed over into that small, quiet country of operators that the young ones tell stories about around the fire without ever being sure the stories are even true. And Ray Maddox. That stress fracture ended his recon dream for good. You don't get many shots at that pipeline, and a broken leg at his age, in that hard economy of bodies and timelines, meant his number was never coming up again. He served out the rest of his time honorably, went back to the infantry, did a couple more deployments, came home in one piece, got out of the Corps, went to work for a county road department somewhere in the flat middle of the country, plowing snow in the winter and patching asphalt in the summer, married a good woman named Dana, raised up 2 kids in a house with a basketball hoop bolted over the garage. But he never once let go of that week out in the desert. He told me he couldn't, and I believed him. He said for most of his life he understood that nod she'd given him in the aid station as the single kindest cruelty anybody had ever done him, because it would not let him hate her, and not being able to hate her meant the only thing left for him to look at all those years was himself. So he did a strange thing for a man to do, and I thought about it more than he ever knew. He followed her career, quietly, from 1,000 miles away, for 20 years. Whenever her name surfaced in one of the small ways those names ever surface, a line in a unit history, a mention in some article that danced right up to the edge of what she did and then backed away from it, Ray Maddox clipped it, or printed it, or copied it down by hand, and he kept it all in a folder. He told me about that folder the way other men confess things in a low voice at the dark end of a bar. His wife knew about it. She thought it was sweet. She didn't fully understand it, and I'm not certain he did either, except that once, in the summer of 2009, a woman he'd bet against had handed him a mirror out in the high desert, and he'd spent the rest of his natural life trying to grow into a man worth the reflection. And he kept that first 20 too, the very bill he dropped in the cap. The cadre had given the pool money back once they understood what it was, and what it had been riding on, And Maddox could have spent that 20 1,000 times over across 20 years, and he never did. He folded it down into a tight little square, and he carried it in his wallet every single day of his life. The worst bet he ever made, riding right there in his back pocket, so that he would never once be allowed to forget it. I met him in his 60s. Gray, heavy set by then, the bad leg dawned stiff on him, so he sat with it out straight in front of him on my porch like it belonged to somebody else. He'd tracked me down because of these stories, these Sunday night stories of mine, and because somewhere in him there was a thing he had been carrying for 30 years that he decided he was finally too old to keep carrying alone. He sat on my porch most of an afternoon with old Bishop's head resting on his good boot, and he told me the whole of it, the cap, the bunks, the 20s, the pool he'd let himself sink in, the wash in the dark, and the man named Pruitt she'd hauled up out of the rocks, the litter, the packed bag, the nod. He cried twice telling it. A big old broken-down road crew Marine in his 60s, crying on a stranger's porch over a week 30 years gone, over a woman he had exchanged exactly 4 sentences with and 1 nod, and never 1 word more. And when he was done, I asked him the only question worth asking. I asked him why. Why carry it that long? Why the folder? Why the bill? Why a grown man chasing the ghost of a stranger's career across 20 years and 1,000 miles? And he was quiet a while, the way the honest ones get quiet before the true thing comes up, and then he said it. He said, "Because she never knew, Gunny. That's the whole thing of it. She never knew there was a bet. She never knew I was the one holding the cap. I've gone over it 1,000 times, and I am dead certain of it. She never knew. And I think about that, and I think all that work she did, every day of those 20 years, she did it without ever needing one of us to be wrong about her. She didn't do any of it to prove me wrong. I just happened to be standing there, on the wrong side of it, when she proved herself right. And I've spent 30 years measuring myself against a person who never spent 1 single second measuring herself against me." And then he said the thing I've carried ever since, the thing that's really why I'm telling you all this tonight. He said, "The loud ones are always betting, Gunny. That's all that noise is. It's a man laying odds, out loud, on everybody else in the room, so he doesn't have to stand still long enough to wonder about the odds on himself. And the quiet ones, the still ones, they're not in the game at all. They're not betting. They're just doing the arithmetic. And the arithmetic always wins. It just takes till Friday. The loud ones are always betting. The quiet ones are doing the arithmetic." I have turned that sentence over more times than I could count, friend, and I think it's about as true a thing as any man ever said on my porch, and a lot of true things have been said on that porch. Now, I told you at the very start I'd have put a 20 in that cap myself, if I'd been a young man in that bay. And I meant it, and I want to come back around to it before I let you go, because if I don't, then I've wasted both our evenings. Here is the lesson, and it isn't the easy one. The easy lesson is don't underestimate people, and that's true, sure, but it's bumper sticker stuff, and you didn't need an old man and a long story to get there. The hard lesson, the real one, the one Ray Maddox paid 30 years, and a leg and a dream to learn, is this. The bet was never really about her. It was never about Sydney Vaughn at all. The size of a person, the inches and the pounds, the shape of them, the parts of them you can size up across a barracks in the time it takes to fill a cap with money, that was never the equation. It was never the math that mattered. The math that mattered was running silently behind a still face 4 bunks down, and not one of those 40 men had the first idea how to read it, because not one of them had ever bothered to learn that there was anything there to read. When you size somebody up fast, and you feel that good clean certainty rise up in you, that little warm rush of knowing exactly what somebody is, I want you to remember Ray Maddox and his cap. Because that certainty, that fast, warm, easy certainty, that is the single most expensive feeling a human being can have. It cost 40 Marines their money. It cost one of them his leg, his dream, and 30 years of peace. And the woman it was all aimed at never even knew the bet was on the table, because she was too busy doing the arithmetic that all of them were too proud to do. The desert settles every account, friend. Always. It just takes till about Friday. Ray Maddox passed 2 winters ago. Dana, his wife, called to let me know, because he'd talked about our afternoon on the porch right up to the end, she said. And she told me something I'm going to leave you with, because I haven't found anything better to leave anybody with since. She said that near the end, when he was getting his affairs in order the way men do, he took that folded 20 out of his wallet, the worst bet he ever made, the one he'd carried 30 years, so he'd never be let off the hook, and he didn't spend it. After all that time, he still couldn't bring himself to spend it. Instead, he mailed it. He'd finally tracked down where to send it, the way he'd tracked everything else about her down across all those years. He put that 20 in an envelope, and he sent it to Sydney Vaughn, retired by then herself, living quiet somewhere, and he put no return address on it and no name. Just the bill and a single index card, and on the card, in a road crew Marine's blocky hand, for words. You were right. Always. She never knew there'd been a bet. She still doesn't, far as anybody knows. Somewhere out there is a woman who once carried a stranger out of a rock-strewn wash at hour 70, and then dropped quietly back into line, and she has got a folded $20 bill and a card with 4 words on it from a man whose name she never learned, and she has got no idea on this earth what any of it means. And maybe that's the most honest ending this story could ever have. Because the people doing the real arithmetic, the still ones, the ones who carry the fallen and bank the 19 minutes of sleep and let the desert do their arguing for them, they so rarely ever find out who was betting against them. They're too busy doing the work to keep score. They leave the scorekeeping to the loud ones. And the loud ones, if they're lucky, if they're very lucky, and they live long enough and get honest enough, they spend the rest of their lives learning to be the kind of person who'd have put their 20 on the other side. That's the story, friend. That's the whole of it. If it sat with you the way Ray Maddox sat with me, then hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next Sunday night. Gunny Hargrove, signing off. Go easy on the loud ones. Most of them are just scared. And go quiet yourself when you can. The arithmetic always wins. It just takes till Friday.